and welcome to ManchTalk. I'm Tammy Simmons.
And I'm Carla Garrick.
And look where we are! We're in the studio. Ironically, last week when Carla and I taped via Zoom, apparently I never hit record properly, so we had a really nice conversation amongst the two of us, but only amongst the two of us.
We did, and we missed you guys, and we missed the studio, and we missed our happy helper producer back there, so it's great to be back here, and it's great to see that maybe life is starting to return to normal.
I think it's creeping there. There's some things that I still can't figure out why. I still am very highly annoyed with why, I don't want to spend the show talking about, but why city offices still are closed. Filing period starts tomorrow morning here in New Hampshire for people running for office. And I just got a clarification from the city clerk's office, which is usually awesome. I have nothing to gripe about. They're probably one of the most efficient offices in the city. But they're only going to...
Unless you're a libertarian recount candidate.
Right, no. The recount, okay. I mean,
sure.
But they're only going to be open on the 12th for in-person filing. Everybody else has to do it via the Dropbox. And I was kind of a little disappointed because I don't understand how I can go to Walmart and all these things, but when Dan went to register his motorcycle, we had to go 3 different times and drop stuff off and pick stuff up and all this craziness.
I mean, it's also amazing because, no one's gotten furloughed, no one's been cut, no one's time has been cut. So I almost feel like there is this opportunity that services should have been peak service should have been served to us online. I got a parking ticket last week. I am very, very bitter about it, and I told them. I mean, I appealed.
They're probably gonna cancel it.
No, they won't. Oh, I already heard from them. So I just said I wasn't going to pay it because I was deemed non-essential, and as a non-essential, I don't see why I can be both essential to pay stuff to keep people not providing us with services and also be essential to pay. I can't.
And I mean, and even at now, we're at the point in this, saga,
madness,
right? Where, what business at this point, now I'm not saying all businesses are open, but at this point, almost all businesses have the ability to open in some form. I mean, it might be convoluted or whatever, but I'm saying if all those businesses
they
can
have
open,
ways
how is
to open. They don't necessarily have ways to make a profit.
I agree, but
I'm saying part of the problem with too much statism, with too big government, with people actually telling you now by decree how to wash your hands in the state, that that they can't make money. So it doesn't help to really say, well, you can be open, because if you can't actually pay your employees or pay your rent or pay any of the things, then you're not really open. Right. You're just hurt in a new and different way. And I
agree with you. I'm just saying that, at this point, how is it that city offices, okay, we can go back and say maybe they were closed because they were, okay. But now with things opening, how come government isn't opening? And it's not just Manchester. I hear this from all the different town clerks and whatever. Secretary of State's office is taking filings outside of the building, which I guess is okay, whatever. It just seems a little odd. Anyways.
So when I go to sign up to run against Canoe Lou, who also was the person responsible, I believe, for writing all this emergency legislation that has devastated so much of Granite Staters' lives over the past 3 months. So you have
I brought some fun stuff because, if you haven't noticed, there's a little upheaval in our country.
You don't say.
For those of you who've been asleep for a week, maybe, in Minneapolis last week, a gentleman was killed by a police officer. I watched the video. He was suffocated.
Yeah, he was murdered.
It was. That police officer has been charged. The 3 police officers that stood by and watched it.
Might add, only reason they got charged is because someone was filming it so that we could prove what actually happened, so that there wasn't just one version.
But going back forward from that, it's hard because obviously I'm not black. But I took it the same way you had taken it. I saw it as that police officer is out of control and should not be doing that. I did not take it as, look at that white police officer killing that black man. Because in that, I don't think the problem lies in necessarily 100% to do with the color of our skin. Granted, I am not black, so I cannot put myself in the situation of knowing what it feels like day in and day out to be a black person living in our country. But I think depending on where you live and whatnot,
I mean, I can tell you in 2017 in New Hampshire, 25% of all people who were shot and killed in the state were shot and killed by police officers. 25% of homicides in 2017 were police officers killing people. And that should stop everyone, and we should analyze that. I believe all of the people in that case were white.
That's what I was going to say. So but we don't, those are stories that are told in a different way. When it is a white police officer killing a black person, or at any time a white person kills a black person, that becomes the core of the story, the difference in the skin color.
Well, I think what's starting to happen is that people are acknowledging and seeing that we have created a systemic problem. You know, there's this beautiful phrase out of a book called, I think it's The Rise of the Warrior Cop, Radley Balco. It's a really interesting read.
I like Radley.
It's academic, it's well-researched, there are footnotes. You know, if you really want to open your eyes about, you know, this particular issue, I highly recommend that book. But in it, they talk about the epidemic of isolated incidences, right? So this is something you'll hear across the nation. And before we had social media and before we actually had tools and technology to level the playing field a little bit, of course, you know, now that's being taken away from us under this guise of censorship and all of that, but that's a separate conversation. This epidemic of isolated incidences. So every little town could be like,
it's just one thing.
There's just one guy, right? But then when you actually start to analyze it nationwide, and I remember, and I've been working on these issues for a long time, but I remember around 2015, I think it was the Ferguson case, when reporters started going, but why aren't there statistics on how many police officers are killing people in the line of duty? You know, not them getting killed, but actually, you know, and the statistics there, I believe for last year, I think there were 47 officers who died in the line of duty. That number actually includes people who have a heart attack within 2 days of any kind of incidents, or, you know, it's a padded number, with all due respect. So it's about 47 to over 1,000 at this stage, right? So I think that there's real anger, there's real frustration, but there's also an opportunity then to maybe
shed some light on the problem itself.
Well, I think everyone at this stage, if you don't know there's a problem, I'm like, wake up. So the question becomes, okay, there's a problem. How do we fix the problem? And so I would say, get rid of qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is something that basically, the way to think about it is a get out of jail free card for police officers and state employees, where they are held to a lower standard than you and I would be held to. Make sure that the unions aren't corrupt and fire people when they do bad things. Stop protecting bad actors.
I remember when the day after this guy had been killed. Now I'm drawing a blank on who wrote it. But somebody, it was Keith Murphy had made a post, and he talked about, you know, all the things wrong, and he talked about, you know, yes, most cops are good. I do believe that I don't believe that all people who become police officers are doing so because they want to, you know, be bad cops. But the problem is if you have this many, you know, you have this handful of bad cops, and let's say all the others are good cops. But the problem is when the good cops turn a blind eye to the bad cops, that actually makes the good cops bad cops.
Well,
because you're ignoring the problem that is tainting your entire profession.
Well, and I mean, we know the saying is, you know, a bad apple spoils the bunch, and that is where it becomes the institutionalized systemic part. And so here in New Hampshire, and I'm sure we'll tie into this, we have good news for a change. somewhat. The New Hampshire Supreme Court did come out last week in 2 right-to-know cases where there was this case from the 90s. It's called the Fenneman case. Yep. It was a very bad decision. It's been a bad decision. It's been around for a long time. It has shielded bad actors. And basically what the Fenneman decision said is anything that the state wants to say is a personnel matter, they're just going to you can't throw it in that file, and then it's exempt from any kind of, open, transparent, responsive, accountable government. And so the state has relied on that to hide things like, disciplinary reports, actual complaints, where they brought in auditors to look at either budgets or how money is being spent, where there's actually been fraud and malfeasance and really, really sketchy, bad, shady stuff. And, they would just put it in the personnel file and say it's exempt. So these 2 decisions, which are not the Lori's List decision, and it's not the Keene case decision, so those should be coming out in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I'm hopeful. But these 2 both said, we are overturning Fenneman, which is a big deal for the Supreme Court to do.
Well, because they're saying that the decision that we made in the past is incorrect.
Was wrong, right? Because they love the stare decisis. It's, we stick to the precedent, which as a lawyer has always confounded me in some ways because I both love it because
but then you go, well, what if we make a mistake?
Consistent, but then also it takes 30 years. When they make a mistake to get it reversed. Yeah. So basically in these 2 cases, what they've said is they haven't said it's not going to be open immediately, right? What the courts have said is we're going to remand this back down to the lower courts, and then people have to use a balancing act. So they have to go, instead of just saying de facto, it's not, you're not allowed to see it, you're not allowed to know what happened. They're saying, the lower court can now look at this and say, well, clearly there's a public interest in knowing that this police officer, one of the cases was the one where the police officer shanghaied the old lady and got her entire estate for $2 million and everything, and there was an internal report, and then they were just like, no, we're just going to hide this. And of course there was public interest. That was a sort of salacious story. A cop actually got fired.
And somebody was losing money. Who else is a victim of this person?
So good news for right to know, good news for open, transparent, accountable, responsive government. Those 4 words, they're all in the New Hampshire Constitution, and we as the citizens in New Hampshire should insist on it, especially as we move into this police state.
Well, so yesterday I stumbled across a post, and these are things that this isn't new to me. There's always the story about how the sausage is made. And Marshall...
It's gross.
Yeah, Marshall Cobley, who was, I think, Ray Wazorek's chief of staff or something. This is probably before your time. Marshall Cobley wrote a book about how the sausage is made. And, it's never a pretty process. That's in real life when you make actual sausage, and also in political things. But yesterday, Jimmy LaHoo, who served a term on the Manchester Board of School Committee, so this is somebody who served on a board, and you'll see all the time if you watch these meetings that from time to time, whether it's the alderman or the school committee, they go into a non-public session, and there are legitimate reasons to go into non-public session. If they're discussing legal strategy, you don't want to be on live TV discussing legal strategy. If you are actually talking about a personnel issue, if you're talking about
of course, this is highly abused at this stage.
But I'm saying there is legitimate reasons why, you don't want everything to be upfront.
Except, honestly, I'm not even sure, other than attorney-client privilege.
Right.
And that should not be
maybe
at
negotiation, maybe contract negotiations, because you don't want to play your hand to the union, maybe. But I don't think that's why they do it. But anyways, So Jimmy had firsthand now saw how the sausage is made. And he made this post, and I'm going to read it for the most part, because I do find that it's very telling. He said, having had the experience in the political arena, I feel I have a different vantage point in how the sausage is made. If I did not speak up, shame on me. It's time to pull the curtain down on our public officials and their ability to go into non-public sessions. This was my experience. Let's go back to the beginning. The cop that murdered Mr. Floyd has quite the rap sheet. This was not his first incident. This begs the question, how the hell was he still on the force? I do not have experience in dealing with police or fire or any other union organized group other than those on the education side. Having seen how the sausage is made on the school side, I can say this. What I have seen is, time and time again, the union protecting those that should not be anywhere near a child or in the classroom. Yes, there are teachers in our system that should not be there, but it only takes the threat of a lawsuit or the city attorney telling us what it would cost to fight the union, and the officials fold like a cheap suit. 1, because the expense would become public, and 2, because they want to maintain the belief that we have all upstanding employees, and 3, or worse, burying the cost into line items that has nothing to do with the situation. There are 1,200 some odd teachers in the Manchester school system, and there were a few cases that came before the board in my tenure. That means those few teachers are still teaching. In one case, when we found out the situation, there was not a single board member whose jaw did not drop. But when the rubber hit the road, the board refused to take action, and yes, this person is still employed in our schools. Should an incident happen with these teachers again, it reflects on the entire teacher occupation, not just the individual, and this is wrong. We have more great teachers than not, but it only takes one to taint the image of all of them. So where did the situation with Mr. Floyd start? Let's look at the rap sheet and see how this officer was able to maintain his badge. And I thought that is really a big part of the problem. The thin blue line, and okay, now I'm going to be labeled as a cop hater because if you say anything bad about any cop, that immediately means you're a cop hater.
So, first of all, I think we should stop disclaiming that because I feel like that is just pandering to their needs. We are allowed to have an open conversation about the people who serve us in a way where we don't have to say, criticizing you is somehow, not allowed. And I don't think we should keep doing these disclaimers.
Fine. I agree.
Did you see that, speaking of the thin blue line, I saw a photo this morning on social media where at a police station, they took down the American flag and raised one of those weird cop flags that has the thin blue line on it. You see it in New York now. I have seen it in New Hampshire. Right. I have them deposed on my transcripts from my lawsuit. That you'll see the insignia, and I ask people to think about this. How is that different from gang signs?
Well, Dan and I had this conversation, and I said, and why does that? Why you don't see other professions have a little bumper sticker on their car with a symbol that represents their profession? So. On the surface, one might say, well, they're just, that's just a pride thing. We're just going to put this little thin blue line sticker on our vehicle to show pride. And maybe I'm a skeptic at heart. Years ago, I remember people used to buy the I support the state troopers thing. You donate to the Troopers Association, and they give you this sticker to put on your car. And I was always told as a kid, well, that's because if you have the sticker on your car, you're less likely to get pulled over for speeding. I happen to believe, and prove me wrong, that the reason the thin blue line stopped just becoming a camaraderie thing and became more of a identity thing is because the police officers put that sticker on their cars and on their spouses' cars and their families' cars so that the police turn a blind eye to them. Well, and that to me as a taxpayer and as a citizen is not acceptable because you're either there to enforce the law equally and across the board or you're not.
But here's the other thing is that with I think that a big part of the problem and the heart of the problem is the training that law enforcement receives now. When we talk about
very militarized.
And I've done, decades of work on the militarization of police, and I've been warning about this for a long time. And I was really, truly heartened to see a very peaceful march in downtown Manchester with hundreds, a lot of people. Yep. People, a little group split off and went to the police station and, the chief came out and spoke to them. I think all of those things are good, right? Because I think part of that is let's make sure that people are talking to each other. Mm-hmm. But if you are training your officers to perceive the people that they claim to serve, although the Supreme Court has said there is no duty for police officers
to protect anybody.
To protect and serve you, just so that everyone back home knows that. Let's not train them to view us as the enemy.
Right.
We're hiring a lot of veterans. Veterans have been trained to view people as the enemy. Yeah. That's their job if they're going into a foreign place. They're soldiers of war. But America is not supposed to be a war zone, although we are very fast moving towards that dynamic, right? So sorry.
No, that's fine. So you've got Jimmy LaHoo saying that, which is interesting, which ties into something I brought up last week.
Oh, I did want to mention, because that sort of question
Fenneman would apply.
Right. Well, that, but also this sort of idea of the shifting of the problematic people to different areas. A lot of our regular viewers will recall that I was horrified by that attack on that child last year at Keene High School, right? Where the kid was leaving the bathroom. He's 15 years old. He's in shorts, pink shorts, and like bobby socks, kind of, like he just looks like he's like a naughty kid. And he's walking out of the bathroom, and I guess he was cheeky, whatever, but if a parent had done this, it wouldn't be legal. And this police officer dives in, throws him on his neck, throws him on the floor and everything. Nothing happened to the cop. The kid was suspended, and the kid who made the video got into trouble too. So that whole dynamic, already wrong. But then I went to do some research on that police officer, the resources officer, because we can't say we have cops in the schools, but we do. And he has shot and killed someone in the line of duty. So when you're shuffling people around, the question also begs to be asked, is that the officer, the peace officer, not a peace officer, that you want in the schools? Because based on the face of it, of that video, that was, if it had been a parent, child abuse. If it had been a teacher, I hope they would have gotten fired, but they probably wouldn't have. Not. So these are the systematic, institutionalized problems. And so when we talk about smaller government, accountable government, these are the things that we're trying to fix. There is a serious problem, and if we're not even allowed to talk about it without being criticized for being critical, then that's part of the problem as well.
Last week in the episode that Carla and I were the only ones who got to see,
it was great.
In a tie-in, I just was like, well, gee, that ties right back into this. So there was a story a couple weeks back, maybe a week or so back, talking about covering. And apparently Maxine Mosley, who I believe is a teacher, who also happens to be the vice president of the Manchester Education Association, so that's the union that, negotiates and organizes the teachers. She was caught shopping at BJ's during the school hours when she's supposed to be teaching remotely. And there was a whole brouhaha over it.
The same Teachers Association, for folks following along, that secretly passed their contract at the start of our lockups. Well,
and during that contract negotiation, there was a big concern about sick and personal time, because we have a very bad problem with teachers calling in sick, and we have a crazy high out sick rate. But anyway,
almost 50%.
It's like some crazy thing, which is very disruptive to the education process. Anyways, the loudest opponent to those to reining in this policy, and who said, the data didn't show the problem, was this teacher, Maxine Mosley, who happens to be the vice president of the teachers union. She argued that there wasn't a problem. She asserted that if there was a problem, that the school district should enforce its way out of it. But she admitted that any action taken by the district would likely be grieved by the union. And she also said that any enforcement mechanism would be absolutely useless. So you've got the teachers union saying, well, we have teachers out calling out sick for wrong reasons and everything, but you should just, process your way out of it. And, oh, by the way, when you start the process, the union's going to back the teacher, and we're going to threaten to sue you. And then you're just going to drop it because, look, Jimmy LaHoo says that's exactly what we do.
But, I also want people to really start to think about, when we talk about personal responsibility and we talk about, doing the right thing and stuff, we can write all the words on paper, and you can try and process things in. You can try and enforce your way in and out of stuff. But ultimately, people, I think, need to really start to just take charge
ownership
of themselves. And that starts, with your health,
Everything.
with everything. So, when I look at everything that's happened over the past 3 months, I'm like, this is such a huge opportunity. Imagine we had used all these resources to try and make people healthier, to really talk about what are you eating? How are you eating? How much sleep are you getting? What shows are you watching? What kind of junk are you putting in your life,
Right.
like all of that stuff, because we're not going to heal the world unless we each heal ourselves. Right. And so if you're one of these people, the Karens, right, where, you're snitching on your neighbors and you're doing all of that, the question is, like, are you doing everything in your life? Like I think the saying is, look at your own plate first, right?
Something. Look inward. Definitely look inward before you start pointing fingers. Well, what did they say? If you point your finger at somebody, 3 of your fingers are pointing back at you. It is true. It's like I find myself, and it's sometimes very hard to explain to those to people. I had a conversation with somebody who was complaining about the neighbor putting up an 8-foot fence, and people saying, well, you should call the police. And I'm like, it's your neighbor's fence. He's allowed to put up a fence. And it just is interesting when you have this dialogue. People, have you talked to your neighbor? Did you think maybe reaching over the fence and saying, hey, what's the story?
When people's first response to any is call the police, we have a serious problem. Right. Let's stop doing that. Talk to your neighbors.
Well, find out what the reality is before you think that somebody's breaking a law. And understand what the police can and can't do.
Well, also because when you call the police, the way to look at it is you're calling someone who is licensed to kill. So unless you're willing to kill your neighbor over the fence, don't call the cops, because I'm not saying they would kill the neighbor.
That's the
point of the police. So
on the wrap up here, if you're out and about, and I don't know if we'll be showing this today, if we'll get this back from the producer and upload it, but it'll be interesting to see if there actually is a second protest in Manchester on South Willow Street tonight. Hopefully, if there is, there will not be vandalism and rioting and looting and whatnot. I did read...
there's supposed to be a peace vigil at Stark Park.
Hopefully.
With candles and...
Providence, Rhode Island report had 50 businesses with damage from a riot there last night.
Don't damage the businesses. Like, direct your anger at the right place, which is at the government and not at, Target.
Right. Target didn't do it. Some of the places I'm seeing pictures of broken windows and stuff. They have signs in the window that say Black Lives Matter, and I think I don't know what. And looting a shoe store,
provocateurs.
Looting a shoe store does not get the message out that there's a problem with police killing people, any people, regardless of how much pigment is in your skin or not. Because that's the way I always like to talk about people, different colors of skin. It's all about pigment. I don't know why we look at how much pigment. We're not looking at what color people's eyes are. Why do we care what color people's skins are? I don't get it. That's the way I have to look at life, and I treat everybody the same. I love equally. I hate equally.
I hate no one.
I don't really hate
love your enemies.
It takes a lot for me to hate people. But he's telling us we have to wrap up after this quick show. Hopefully we'll be back in the studio again next week.
We will.
Great news that there was no deaths from COVID in New Hampshire yesterday. Yay. Anyways, have a wonderful week. Enjoy the outdoors, and we'll see you next week.
Peace out, guys.